Hi, and welcome into another edition of Battle Plans. My name's Tony Lombardi with Russell Street Report, and I'm here with Dev Panchwagh and James Ogden. Fellows, tough week one to really, it's a bitter pill to swallow on Monday night. I don't think any of us thought that we'd be here today looking at a Ravens team that's 0-1.
Yeah, I don't. It was very unforeseen. I know Vegas opened their stadium, so that's a tough environment to play in. And I actually thought the Raiders are a better team. We talked about it on the last Battle Plans. It would be a tough game, but to actually think they would lose, I didn't think that outcome was going to happen.
Yeah, it's a tough, start to a season, and we're going to be talking about the Kansas City Chiefs right now. That's a daunting task to have for a team with such high postseason aspirations to possibly start the season 0-2.
Yeah, I wrote in the intro to the piece this week that people should maybe go and read is that as if the stakes weren't high enough already, because we're measured by this yardstick now of the Chiefs. Everyone in the AFC is, but like to have to now go in trying to avoid an 0-2 start kind of ups the pressure. Hopefully, we'll go in as a wounded animal and kick the door down, a la Brian Billick screaming like a banshee.
Let's hope so. So let's get right into it, guys. Let's break it down. Like you said, it's a familiar foe, but we'll talk about the changes with both the teams to see how they should go about attacking the Kansas City Chiefs, both on offense and defense. So let's start off with offense, James. One of the things you have developed in your piece is really to focus in on running the football effectively, a staple of the Ravens offense.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this because it was the first bullet point in my first battle plan, and I think it's important to do it. I think there's two sort of parts to it. So I'll talk to the first part, which is run the ball. We need to do that against the Chiefs. And the reason I say it, some people I've seen sort of reference to kind of, and this was a theory that a lot of teams tried last year around kind of controlling the clock against the Chiefs. That's not why I think we should run the ball against the Chiefs. Like that was kind of proven to be a little fruitless last year. You can control the clock, but they're just going to score in 2 seconds, and then you'll get the ball back, but they've scored. So, you want to limit their chances, but the chance that they have a high percentage of scoring on every drive. So it's not about controlling the clock for me. For me, it's more about the way to attack this team. So it's in some ways it's very different to the Raiders in the sense that we're going up against a really complex coverage scheme this week. And probably not as dominant a defensive line as we faced in the first week. I think as the season wears on, we'll start to see how good Max Crosby actually really is, and that could be one of the best guys we face all year in terms of a pass rusher. So I think where the running the ball starts is with the running backs, but I think it starts with specific run plays, and the one I wanted to sort of touch on here was inside zone. The Chiefs have a personnel package they run in that includes Derek Nardi and Colin Saunders, and so they get a lot of heft on the field, or at least try to, and often that can have Chris Jones playing as the base defensive end as well. So they often have 4 big guys up front to try and stop the run, and they did that against us last year. I'd like to see inside zone because it gets 2 double teams on those big guys inside. So I'd like to see us. We don't run a lot of that. It'd be great if we did do a little bit against the Chiefs this week, but I think it's about certain personnel. And I definitely think pulling and our usual power run game is going to work. You saw the Browns run that all day long against them last week and have a lot of success.
Have anything to that?
Yeah, to James's point, I mean, I think the beauty of this run scheme for Roman is they can go man, they can go zone, they can do combinations, right? This isn't only a zone running scheme or only a man running scheme. So that's what they can do. And I think I agree with him in terms of how to attack the Chiefs, that the Browns got to the second level a lot in that game too. Second level, meaning they're getting up on those linebackers. So that added to not just having a running game that was, getting the job done up front, but they were getting to the second level. They were getting some big runs from Chubb and to some extent to Hunt. It was really Chubb that really killed them. So I think I think you have to establish that ability to get up on those linebackers because they're smaller linebackers, they're fast. Their game is more predicated, kind of like the Colts, Tony. If you think back to those Colts defenses that Peyton Manning had, it's not built necessarily to go a one-on-one in a street brawl, right? So that's another key I noticed with what the Browns did very well. But I think if you do that, I think you're setting yourself up, to James's point, not just to run the ball and control the clock. You want to hit big plays in the run game, which the Browns did very well.
Yeah, I'm with you, Dev. I think the bit that I'm concerned about for the Ravens in terms of getting to the second level is, I agree with you. They were at the second level wreaking havoc, but Teller, and especially Batonio was getting on and staying. Like he was fit and finishing his blocks at the second level, and those linebackers didn't stand a chance. Nick Bolton looked really good when he was able to fly around and take on tight ends. But when Batonio was coming down at him, it was a real struggle. I'm yet to see a lot of evidence that the Ravens interior linemen can get on and stay on at the second level. So that'll be a big key to the game, I think.
Guys, in watching that first game, it did not look like the Ravens' typical rush attack. And it's not so much that they didn't stick with the run. It just looked different. They were under center a lot more. And, I subscribe to the theory that, the running backs are made in part by Lamar Jackson and how he spreads a defense and how a defense has to account for him. But one of the things I think that was overlooked going into the game by some, myself in part included, is the value of that mesh point. And I think because they aren't as, familiar with each other, these new running backs and Lamar, that mesh point isn't as clean as it might be with a Dobbins or an Edwards or a Hill. So I think that there's a lack of familiarity there that changes the way they approach the running game. You guys agree?
Yeah, I'll start, Tony, and I do agree that there was a bit of a distorted approach, right? You're used to this very seamless, start for this run. To your point, to the handoffs, to just the attack plan with the mesh, and because Tyson Williams and Lamar clearly didn't have that rhythm, it seemed like Tyson was grabbing hold of the ball too hard, and then all of a sudden, it's a very tricky handoff process. If you get it right, it's great, but on the flip side, it is easier to just kind of hand the ball off like traditionally behind center. So I think they were stuck in the mud a bit. This is a perfect example too of, you can install all you want in the preseason, but when you have guys coming in and out of the lineup, and then you're playing your first game, and then all of a sudden everybody's playing for the first time 60 something, snaps or whatever it is, or 60 reps, whatever it is. Point is that you're not in any rhythm. So the first game is tough, right? So I think hopefully after this week's practice, they get a better game plan together. But I do agree that it distorted, I think, the creativeness and kind of the, what you normally see from the Ravens. It was more vanilla. It was a little bit more conservative.
Yeah, I felt like I completely agree, Dev. I felt like with Latavius Murray specifically, they stayed very much away from much mesh point stuff. Like Tyson got, they need to do some, so Tyson got some work. But with Murray, the thing that I think is underrated is like the communication takes some time to get down, and sort of getting to know Lamar, knowing because Lamar is an unusual option quarterback in that he will hold that ball a long time, and he will pull the ball a lot later than a lot of other quarterbacks that run the scheme. But with Murray, he's not really run much of that stuff. He's very inexperienced at it, and it's a different technique for a running back. There's a J step at the start of the technique where it's kind of like a step replace that you do at the start, and then once you have the ball in your gut, you then kind of need to keep your shoulders squarer than you would normally do on a run. So it is a subtly different technique for a running back to get themselves used to. And Murray just hasn't run much of it. So he will need some reps to get that technique down, as well as the communication that you'll have to, as well as the kind of getting to know Lamar and how he runs that mesh point. So that was definitely an issue. I think one of the other reasons why there was a problem with the running game was that we couldn't keep Tyson Williams on the field that much because of his deficiencies in pass protection that started to show up. That might be an issue going forward.
Speaking of pass protection, the Ravens certainly lacked in that department against the Raiders. And Alejandro Villanueva, we heard from Steelers fans all season, and we thought maybe that was just, sour grapes. But first game notwithstanding, it doesn't look like sour grapes so far. It looks like that guy is just overmatched, and we'll see if he develops as the season goes on. But the passing game in general, I want to talk a little bit about Steve Spagnuolo's coverage schemes and how you think the Ravens ought to go about attacking them through the air. But there were times in the Raiders game where they really looked, when Lamar had a clean pocket, that they really had a good plan, and he's got some weapons, and he threw the ball, I think, a whole lot better when he wasn't under pressure.
Yeah, so if you go back and read my battle plan from week 1, I actually felt like the game plan was set up really well. We came out throwing the ball to the flats. There was a lot of patience from Lamar. They stuck to a premeditated game plan to open up the seams, which I think I referred to as the fleshy underbelly of the cover 3 defense. So they definitely did that quite a lot during the game, and you saw later on in the first half those seams started to open up, and Lamar started to throw some darts in there. So I felt like they definitely stuck to a really good game plan, and I felt like Lamar did show some growth from last year in what he was doing.
Yeah, I agree with James. It looked good. They had some good natural cover 3 beaters down the field as well. And they used the receivers and they spread the field, as we highlighted in battle plans. They kind of did a wide spread, which means your receivers are from sideline to sideline. They're out there and you're kind of giving them opportunities. Their spacing is good. It was very good design, I thought, from Roman. Very underrated. That completion to Watkins is a prime example where he got a matchup on a safety. That's exactly what you want. Sammy Watkins on a safety, you're going to win that 9 times out of 10. So it is a different animal, and I know we're going to go to that with Kansas City and what they do coverage wise. But I think that some of the things that they were able to get down from this game against the Raiders, in particular attacking the flats, is stuff that they're going to have to continue to push towards this season.
James, how does the approach change against Spagnuolo's defense?
So Spagnuolo is really interesting. If you sort of do any research on him, he's a guy that obviously the casual fan just remembers from those Giants defenses and getting great pressure with a front 4 with a phenomenal front 4 that sort of takes the pressure off the secondary. But the guy's actually a coverage savant. Like he's I think for an older guy, he embraces new concepts really quickly and really readily. And so you would see him using coverage like there's a man match defense that Nick Saban developed at Alabama that he was one of the first to incorporate into his coverage packages in the NFL. So the guy is like, he's very innovative in terms of the coverage that they run. I think basically the key to their the real key to their defense is Tyrann Mathieu. It's no coincidence that defense got better and got resolved really as an issue for that team when Spagnuolo came, but also when they brought in Mathieu in free agency. What Spagnuolo will do is he will roll his coverage an awful lot, and the coverage that he's running will not reveal itself until so often 1 to 2 seconds into the play. Because the safeties are doing things you don't see from other teams. And the reason they can do it is because of Matthew's versatility. He's able to do so much as a safety that you can sort of roll him around and move him around. So he's the kind of kingpin, the chess piece that Spagnuolo uses. So you've got to know what he's doing all the time. I think there are ways to attack that defense, and I think Dev will speak to Mark Andrews, but I think the main thing is they run a lot of pattern match coverage, and if you want to beat pattern match coverage, you need to attack the overhang defender, and honestly that means seams, and that means getting a mismatch on that defender, on the overhang defender. The Browns did it to a treat with David Njoku. who looked like everything we'd expected him to be coming out of the draft. And the thing I think is that, and you look at them, Andrews is actually athletically comparable to David Njoku. People think Njoku's this athletic freak, and he is, but Andrews is not that far off. So it'd be great if we could start to use him a bit more creatively to beat this defense.
Yeah, the Andrews, real quick. I think the thing that's really, and James and I have spoken about this, has really hurt the Ravens is Andrews' lack of productivity against the Chiefs, because invariably the Chiefs are saying, to James's point, invariably the Chiefs are saying go to these routes, right? So they're kind of, it's Andrews' game, and it's not as if the Ravens haven't tried. Last year in that game, if you guys remember, Andrews and Lamar were off by just a couple of inches on some completions, key completions down the seam, down the bucket, if you will. And that one touchdown that Andrews dropped in the end zone kind of hurt them. So it's there on film. The seam routes is there, and also kind of want to extend the point. I think the Browns did a great job as well, utilizing their tight ends in the flats, off of play action, off of boot action. So they got their tight ends in space, and I haven't seen that from the Ravens against the Chiefs. I think the Chiefs have understood that Andrews is their go-to target, and because of that, they funnel the coverage to Andrews regardless. So even with these routes kind of being there, it's still tough for Lamar to drop the ball over the defender, to James's point. But I think this is a good game to kind of get Andrews going again and can use variations of routes. They need him against this type of coverage.
Of course, the Ravens are going to need to account for Frank Clark and Chris Jones, and that's a job that is not going to be easy for the Ravens, given they're on the heels of what they did against the Raiders. So what can the Ravens do to help AV out a little bit on that right side with their tight ends and get them involved, not only in pass protection, but in the passing game?
Yeah, James, I'll take this one on just because I think it naturally loops back to what we just said, right? What did the Browns do? Again, I keep pounding the Browns, no pun intended, but play action, boot action. They got Baker moving side to side. They had a moving pocket. I just think that that really helps your line, right? Because AV is not going to necessarily have to block on a 5 or 7 step drop. I mean, part of it is he's going to have to do that no matter what. There's going to be certain scenarios in third downs, passing situations where he has to. But I think that's one way to help him. The other is the Ravens started incorporating this in the second half. They started giving AV some help with extra blockers. Obviously, there's some net gains and kind of losses from that. Loss being you don't have as many guys out on routes, but the net gain is protection is fortified when you have a back or a tight end helping to chip. So I think more 2 tight ends. I'd like to see more 2-3 tight end variations. Tomlinson, Oliver, get them involved. I didn't think Oliver was very involved in that last game, and it was a lot of 3 receiver. Yeah, I mean, it was very. I can understand that to an extent, maybe because of the cover 3 shell and kind of what they wanted to do to attack those inside zones. But this game kind of screams to me to go back to the tight ends and get them involved in the blocking game. So I think all that can help AV.
Let's move on to the defense, guys. We talked about, last week, Wink Martindale using a lot of different varied looks. And I think, to put it in James's terms, show some eye candy to Derek Carr. Well, to me, just my assessment, I thought that they showed that eye candy way too early pre-snap. And I think the Raiders were able to take advantage of that. But at the same time, he seemed to get a little overzealous. And when you get that way with good quarterbacks, they almost invite the blitz. And Mahomes certainly does that and picked the Ravens apart last year at M&T Bank Stadium. Your thoughts on Wink's approach this week against the Chiefs?
Yeah, so I thought Derek Carr did a masterful job identifying our blitz schemes. He knew where it was coming from. He got his offensive line organized, and they very rarely had trouble with our exotic blitzes. Mahomes is an entirely different entity altogether. So I've now watched an awful lot of Patrick Mahomes, more than I'd care to want to, given that he's in our conference and we have to overcome him. Because when you watch so much of him, you realize how good he is. And the thing that he is, and I describe it in battle plans as a quote I once heard from Lance Armstrong, who, and obviously the caveat that we now know it wasn't Lance Armstrong's attitude that made him successful, it was doping. But he had an attitude that when he opened his curtains at the start of a day's racing, and he saw it was pouring with rain and it was blinding wind, and maybe the day they were going to have to go over some cobbles, he thought to himself, yes, now.
Deb, are you hearing me okay?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
we got
there
a little
was a slight
disruption
pause
with
there.
James. So we'll come back to James when he's got a cleaner connection. But I did want to talk a little bit about how the Ravens will defend Kelsey as well as Hill, and specifically Kelsey, because the Ravens did a poor job, I thought, of really defending Waller. Not so much in the coverage, because I thought that they were there, but he got such a clean release far too often. And I think you need to disrupt the timing of those guys. And I think Kelsey's just another one of those guys that needs to be hit at the line of scrimmage before he gets into his pattern.
Well, it's an interesting observation. It was so maddening to chart and track that, because that was probably my primary emphasis was Waller, as James knows. I sent him about, 20 bullet points of notes on specific coverage techniques that they used, and they did everything in the kitchen sink. But it was weird that in those third down high leverage, we call them high leverage situations, because those are situations where you really want to come through on defense, and they just kind of had some moments where I thought, is this the Dean Pease defense all over again? Well, you have Waller with the free release, and he's playing against their third or fourth corner one-on-one, and so I just didn't understand, because when they had Marlon Humphrey play Waller, that would be one coverage technique I thought really worked. Third down situations, playing one-on-one, that worked. To your point, Tony, mug him at the line of scrimmage whenever they could. It worked. I think at one point Odafe Owe actually knocked him on his butt, and it was shades of Adelius Thomas, if fans remember Adelius Thomas and what he would do at the line of scrimmage for Rex Ryan. And then on the other side of it, the Raiders adjusted though. They did some bunch. They went back to the bunch. They did hide Darren Waller. They were able to get him free releases, so that helped. And regardless, I think that against Kelsey, you're going to have to make it difficult for him on those releases. And the Chiefs are the best in the business in terms of getting Kelsey free in different ways. They hide him as well, and they move him around and basically give him an opportunity with two-way goes. So it's going to be the same type of challenge. But I think there's a lot of good things that Wink did. I don't know that we should focus as much on the bad, because ultimately with 19 attempts, Waller still caught 10 passes, 100 yards. I know that looks bad on paper, but they kind of won like half the time. So against Kelsey, it's going to have to be better. It's going to have to be more consistent. I think Wink needs to gravitate to the good though, and discard and chuck out some of these other kind of wonky concepts they had.
James, before we lost you for a second there, you were talking about the differences between Carr and Mahomes, and your game film study of Mahomes. Can you jump in and pick up where you left off?
Yeah, so I don't know if you got all of the Lance Armstrong comparison, but basically Mahomes relishes the blitz. He wants you to blitz him. If you blitz him, he is going to make you pay, and it's uncanny. He carves it up like no other quarterback I've seen, and I think the reason that is because he's an elite processor. Like it's off the scale, off the charts quickly. He can process defenses. And so he will do that when you blitz him in strange ways. And you're also putting yourself at a disadvantage if you are doing a lot of the zone blitzes that the Ravens do, because you're getting guys who are having to drop into zones from the line of scrimmage. And Mahomes is going to take advantage of that all day. In fact, I think he's better against zone blitzes than against anything else. So he's a really difficult guy to match up with for the Ravens, because you just, like, as much as people could say just rush 4, I'm not sure we'd get home with 4, and I'm also not sure that you can go away so much from your identity just for 1 week. So they have to stay true to themselves to an extent, but in staying true to themselves, the Ravens will run into problems against Mahomes, because he just carves it up so much. If I could come in on the Kelsey Hill thing as well, I think one of the problems this week compared to the Raiders is that if you focus too much on Kelsey, then Tyreek Hill's going to beat you. If the Chiefs' offense is built on speed and spacing, it's a classic West Coast at its heart. But Andy Reid has built castles on top of a West Coast offense shell over the course of his career, and we've now got to the point where it's really difficult to stop. And with both those guys, they both act as decoys for each other. They make you pick your poison. Are you gonna bracket Hill, or are you going to bracket Kelsey? Because the way in which they organize their offense often means that you can't do both. And if you can do both, as much as the rest of the receiving core is a little suspect, and without Watkins, I do think that is a way to go. You do then need to be careful of Clyde Edwards-Helaire out the backfield, who can pick it up and run it from after the catch. So they're a really difficult offense to defend. And the big thing I would say is it's about picking your poison. It's about making the best bet. They are going to rip off big gains against you. You need to decide how you think you have the best chance against them, looking at their scheme, but also within your own scheme and your own personnel to stop them a few times is what you need to look at.
Across the line of scrimmage, Wink Martindale will see a familiar face in the form of Orlando Brown Jr. Talk about the Chiefs' offensive line and how the Ravens can potentially manipulate them, because they're kind of a group that's new to each other, and they're still getting their legs under them and trying to gel as a cohesive unit. So talk about Orlando Brown Jr. and that Chiefs offensive line.
So I think for me, there was an awful lot on Twitter and an awful lot from Ravens fans about Orlando Brown's performance for the Chiefs, and sort of a bit sort of big gloating about the trade. Orlando Brown was I felt watching it back, he made a lot of his blocks functional. They looked very ugly, and he was chasing, really struggling. But I felt like it wasn't a terrible performance. He did a decent job against Myles Garrett in making his blocks functional. But Myles Garrett only executed a speed rush. He challenged the edge an awful lot, but he didn't do much else. He didn't come off that. And I thought that was a little odd, because Garrett has a lot more in his locker than just that speed rush. In fact, it's probably not the best weapon he has. So then I looked to the other side, and what the Browns were doing on the other side was they were attacking Lucas Niang, who is their second-year right tackle, but who opted out last year, so he's basically a rookie, through him. They were trying to go through him, they were trying to go inside him, they attacked him with power, they attacked him with spin moves. He could not deal all day long with that. So what it effectively created was a pincer movement that stopped Mahomes from rolling to his right and throwing downfield by rolling to his right, which is where he's most dangerous, is when he rolls to his right and gets out of the pocket and does off-platform stuff. So I think that's the way to that. I wouldn't go away from that blueprint. I would stick Oweh on Orlando Brown, have him speed rush him all day. I think Oweh will probably get around sometimes. And I think, you can build games and stunts off that as well, because Oweh was great on those against the Raiders. And then I'd have Houston or McPhee just try and go through Niang all day long, and see what happens. That's how I'd start with, because it did work for the Browns to a treat. The interior of their offensive line looked good. It really did look solid. Joe Thuney obviously is a stud, but Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith, the two rookies, also looked pretty good too. So I'm not sure the interior is as much of a weakness as everybody was hoping it was going to be.
Just to add to,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Don.
Go ahead.
Just real quick would be, I think the Ravens have more talent in their interior rush to challenge the Chiefs versus the Browns, though, especially Calais Campbell. Some of the things that have come out after looking at the clips and the tape after the fact, and Wink did move Calais Campbell around, and Calais Campbell is more influential in the pass rush than meets the eye, because they didn't have as much success getting home. So just something to keep in mind is that Campbell's going to give them a challenge in the interior.
Dev, staying with you, James did mention Sammy Watkins, a former Chief, and he's got this. Sammy Watkins is pegged as part of the key matchup in this contest, and that matchup is against L'Jarius Sneed. So talk about that matchup and what the Ravens could do to free up Sammy, because first game notwithstanding, Sammy looked pretty good in that contest against the Raiders, and hopefully they can keep up that momentum against the Chiefs, his former team.
Yeah, and I do think he's primed for another solid performance or an encore performance. The key, and James hit on it earlier with Spags, is that he just doesn't respect the second, or at least he didn't respect the receiving core last year, right? Maybe this year is a different story, but I don't know. I think he's going to continue to push or really put the pressure on the Ravens receivers, and that even including Sammy Watkins, to win one-on-ones downfield. And that's what Sammy can definitely do. You saw it, and he's healthy. He's got the burst, which was missing, I think, last year when he was dealing with the groin and soft tissue injuries. So I think it's Sammy's game in a lot of ways, because I think with Hollywood, it's going to be interesting to see what they do with Matthew. Is he going to just focus more on Andrews? Is he going to be kind of that inside rover that they're going to use as a chess piece to take Andrews away from Lamar? And again, continue to force the action to Watkins and Hollywood. But the good news is, obviously, 10 catches, 165 yards between both guys. And even though Snead, I think, is kind of an, he's an underrated corner, and as part of that entire secondary, which is kind of underrated for Kansas City. They do a good enough job in man situations, I think, and it's physical. So Watkins is going to have to work through that. But I do think this sets up well for Sammy to have a good game against his former team.
James, you want to wrap this up for us?
Yeah, just I think this is obviously a really, really tough matchup. I think it's one which doesn't suit very well to the Ravens. But I think what it boils down to really is limiting big plays and getting big plays ourselves. That sounds really simple, but that's what it is. And with the Chiefs offense, which is by far the most interesting part of this matchup, it is, as I said, pick your poison, make your best bet for the best way in which you can limit Mahomes, and hopefully Wink has the game plan for that.
Yeah, I think to sum it up with 2 words, I guess 3 words: mistakes, big plays, and there's and in there. But that's been the MO in these games. You look at 2019, you look at 2020 last year, right? They just they couldn't cash in on big plays on offense. They gave up big plays on defense invariably every time, right? So enough big plays, broken plays downfield, and they may give up 1 of those or 2 of those, but you don't want those to turn into instant touchdowns, which the Browns fell victim to last week on that Tyreek Hill. I think it was an 80-yard touchdown or whatever it was. So I agree, and you can't turn the ball over. But again, these are things that have beguiled the Ravens in the last 2 games, and that's really contributed to these losses.
Good stuff as always, fellows. On behalf of myself, Tony Lombardi, Dev Panchwagh, and James Ogden, this is Battle Plans, and thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week. All right, fellas.